Hey yo, it's Gluke. Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about column response and bass drop. Let's go. Here we are back in our project. Hey yo, it's Editor Gluke. Real quick. When I was filming this, I was sick and also allergies had been ramped up, so I was pretty out of it for most of the filming. Because of that, I forgot to explain a lot of the stuff that I was doing, but my main goal with this video is to show you a bass drop workflow, and so I'll do my best to fill in the context, but just a fair warning, this video is kind of all over the place. You can see in the first bit that I struggle to make any progress, but if you want to skip to where I do start making progress, go ahead and skip to 3:31. Last week we worked on the build in here, and I told you all that we were going to work on the drop. Well, today's the day. This is what we have so far with the build, and then when we go into the drop, you'll hear it's just kind of dry, and so this is what we'll be working on today.
Makes my body go.
The main idea is there, but I think what we should do is maybe try making this a sort of A-B section where here's our A section and here's our B section. We'll have something different happen here so that it goes kind of back and forth between the two. First, what I usually do when I'm working on these drops is I'll usually turn off all of the stuff that's just going to distract me from the bass. And so listening to this bass group here, I think that this first note would be a little bit more interesting. It's just sort of I think this one actually should be maybe a sustain. I can't believe we're using Serum 1. Time to upgrade. Oh, thank God. Okay, so if you want to know more about my workflow when it comes to writing these kind of basses where it's just on like one beat, go ahead and watch my wet shit bass tutorial. I'll put a link to that in the description, but I'll go ahead and cook up a little something for us. Okay, so as I was doing the sound design on this main hit, I ended up making this instead. I kind of like this more, maybe as like a atmosphere thing. It just fits better. So sometimes that's how sound design goes. Sometimes you try to make a womp and you end up making a plink, but we still need to make our main call synth. So let's try again. Well, here's an interesting idea. I think I'm just going to ignore the main call for now and work on this synth. I was just messing with macro 1. I'm putting it on the octave here for the AM. So this is the one that we're hearing and it's getting affected by the AM. And if I start playing with it like this, get some weird sounds. So let's go ahead and try like making a rhythm out of that. Just don't know what's going on with these notes, man. Okay, so I don't really know what I want in the drop yet, but I really like how this sounds coming in. Now, when I'm thinking about this drop, I don't really want this to be the main thing, because I can already tell that this is just going to be sort of a nightmare to figure out. And I think that because we have a two-step thing here, and we've got a pretty nice, just sort of atonal vocal here, that we can get away with a lot of sustained basses in this part and then just add some interesting fills. And we'll just end up using this as a build element. So what I'm going to do first is freeze. That way I can get the audio if I want, but it's not like rendering in the project anymore. And then I'll go ahead and get rid of this sub layer. So now we've got this just here in the build. Now the next step is going to be figuring out what note we actually want to start on in the drop. That's going to determine where all of the other notes go, obviously. And that might be different than the verse here. Okay, so what I'm talking about here is if there's any type of modal change between the verse and the drop. I'll do a full video on modes, but if you know the key signature you're writing in, just stick with that for now. So for the verse, we just have F, A sharp, C sharp.
Makes my body go.
Okay, so it's going to go to F. So now we'll make the first initial like hit. There's our first hit, and then the second one is just going to be a really long F subnote. Here's what I have so far. I made this bass, and it's not quite as gritty as I want, but it follows that same half-step pitch down, the wheel. And then this will be where we'll put in something else. So we can have a A and then a B section here. When I'm doing these sections, I'll sometimes just throw in like the pluck from the verse just to make sure everything is cohesive and like in key. And then I'll pull this out later. But the way that I write drops is not very straightforward. I'll usually just keep experimenting with sounds until I end up with something cool. This is what I have so far.
Makes my body go, 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 go.
So you can hear that obviously this section needs to be filled now, but I think that this is a good enough start. I'm just going to start sketching ideas in this second section here. And since we don't have this initial hit, it's pretty much just going to run the entire length of that section. So there's our note. Get a serum cooked up, and let's see what we end up making. Okay, so here's what I've got so far. I feel like it sounds kind of wonky, but that's okay because the main thing is just getting the sounds out, and then I'll turn these into audio so that I can better arrange each individual piece. Here is what we have so far.
Makes my body go, 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 go.
So this one is pretty much exactly how I want it to sound, but there's that little click at the end. What I'll do is freeze and flatten. Like this little click right here is from the compressor when the compressor stops compressing. You can see that it's right after the beat. All we need to do, get rid of that. Much cleaner. And with this one, I think what I'm going to do is just freeze it for now. And then I'll go ahead and take just this snippet out. When it's frozen, you can copy audio out of the channel and put it in an audio channel like this. And that also gives you the entire freeze. What I think I'm going to do is do a couple different takes of this synth just so that it evolves throughout the drop. And we'll call this main rumbler. And I need to put sub on this because when I was making it in Serum, you can see that I was using sine waves that were out of phase.
Quick bit of knowledge. When you're doing basses, phase is really important because the size of the wavelengths are much larger, so you're more likely to run into phase issues. Phase refers to the shape of the waveform, and so these two sine waves are in phase because they both go up at the same time and they both go down at the same time. And we can hear that when we play the note. We actually get a note. If one of them is out of phase like this, and they're both playing at the same octave, we're not going to get any sound. Look at that. If I leave it playing and I increase one an octave just so that we're not playing the exact same note and they aren't perfectly canceling out, we'll see that we'll get sound. This is just important to keep in mind, but as long as you're actually getting the sub to rumble or you see it on the spectrum that you have low end, you should be good to go.
So there is no sub, just the fizzle, but that's okay because that's why I saved this one. Make the sub, all I need to do is turn off all the others. Then we can freeze again. Now we're only getting the sine wave, and we'll just go ahead and copy and paste that. Look at that. And so what's nice about this now is that when I go and turn all of this other stuff back on, I don't need to worry about getting a clean sub because we'll just use the same sub clip for both of these. Let's make another one. So I'm not a huge fan of this pattern on its own, but now that I have it in audio, we can just cut it up. So oftentimes when you're developing out songs and ideas and stuff, I've found that once you have a better idea of what you're doing in the section that's the most well thought out, that's going to influence other things in the song. What I'm talking about here is that we had this re-space at the beginning. And coming out of the drop here in the break, I put that there just to see what it would sound like. And I felt as though it just had a bit too much motion, and I felt like something simpler would be better. So here's what it sounds like if we just slap it there.
Go, makes my body go.
So instead, what I opted for was just having the F, our tonic, come in on the second count and then going down to the sixth, because that's going to give us a lot of color without a lot of motion.
Okay, you may notice I'm wearing a different shirt, and that's because I went to bed. When you're working on small pieces of music, when I mean small, it's like I was literally just working on these two sections here. It's good not to obsess for a long amount of time because usually you'll have a general idea there. And then as you're tweaking stuff, you'll start changing more and more things to make it all work. Where I left off last night was I had the main idea here. The primary column response is done. Here's what it sounds like now going into it. And now we just need to add like small embellishments and other stuff to help give this drop a bit more context so that when it comes in, it sounds natural.
I know I never felt this before.
Makes my body go. Makes my body go. Makes my body go.
Never felt this before.
For whatever reason, my Ableton keeps getting really crunchy and overprocessed during this specific transition, and I don't know why. One of the big things I wanted to share about where the song's at now is that as I was playing with different sounds, the main sound that we had to make was this one. And so I got 4 different versions of that. And I felt like when I was doing it just off of one layer, it wasn't changing as much as I wanted it to. So what I ended up doing, here's our sub layer. And that's just not going to change. For the middle one, all I'm doing is cutting off a bit of the lows. I added a chorus so that it has some movement. And then on the top layer, I did the same thing, except with this one, the chorus doesn't automate and the amount is much higher. A big part of this process is using EQs to gradually cut out the higher and higher layers of that. The top layer's low cut is much higher than the middle layers. That's because the middle layer still has the chest of the sound. So now we've got 3 layers here, and all together we get this big sound. And I'll probably do a little bit more processing on it just to get it to sound perfect, but that's good enough for now. Yesterday we saw me do a bunch of these takes, and all that really was me playing around with one patch and just changing things like octaves or the sync rate or the wave shape or whatever, but we wanted 4 similar sounds, and that's what we ended up getting. This would be the call in our column response, and then for the response, I ended up making this sound. In my personal opinion, it's a bit too crunchy, but it fits really well with the vibe. So I think that I just need to add something over top of it because the movement on it is really nice. And the way that I made this one, all the same stuff as usual with, distortion, compressor and stuff, one big MIDI note. What I did was I drew in the envelope here because I wanted it to sort of have 2 eighth notes on beat and then 2 off beat, but with the right swing. Nothing but the standard. So on this one, I set the filter on the distortion to a bandpass, and then I modulated that so it gets a bit more talky. Nothing that you haven't seen before, really. Then what I did is I turned it into audio and then started adding little clips and stuff here. So like these ones I added. And we also fixed up our initial hit. The main thing is that I like the idea for this drop, and so now it's just about adding contextual stuff like little chord hits or little fills and stuff. So when it comes to writing drops like that, mainly when it comes to column response, if you're struggling with making synths that sound like they belong together, that's probably because you're using synths that are just too far apart. This tends to work best when you use just one synth and then just change small things about that so that it's playing all the same notes and doing all of the same movements, but just with a slightly different texture. Another thing too was that in all of my experimenting, I ended up making this one that kind of sounds like supersonic. At first, I really liked that as the main rumbler, but then when I heard it in the context of the rest of the song, it sounded really nice. Here, for example, where we're not in the drop.
I never felt this before. I know I never felt this before.
So I'm
I'm using this instead of our main respace. I wanted to highlight here that not everything you write in the drop necessarily belongs in the drop. The drop should be focused on one idea. If what you make doesn't add to the idea here, that's not because it's wrong. It just probably belongs somewhere else. So in this case, this chord rumbler belonged in the verses and stuff, and it ended up turning out really nice. Here's what it sounds like coming out of the drop.
Go, go, makes my body go.
Never felt this before. Never felt this before.
It helps make it more cohesive because this is a very like digital sound, and the drop is a lot of computer noisy kind of stuff. So that is how we ended up with this.
Never felt this before. I know I never felt this before.
Makes my body go. Go, 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 makes my body go. Makes my body go.
Never felt this before. Never felt this before.
Makes my body go.
I never felt this before.
The main thing now that I'm hearing in this drop is that it lacks the motif that would bind this verse to this drop, and that would just be one little like note thing or maybe like a vocal hit or something, but some common element between these two that blends it all together. Once I get that idea, I will go ahead and make a video about it. But for now, as always, be sure to like and subscribe, bro. Be sure to hit the bell so you know when I post new videos, and we'll see you in the next one.